to our Telco AI Deep Dive series. In this installment, it's a pleasure to have Jeff Hollingworth with us to talk to us a little bit about what Rakuten is doing around AI. So, Jeff, to start with, maybe you can just give us a sort of high-level overview of the opportunities you see for operators to use AI to create value for themselves and create value for their customers.
Yeah, sure, Sean. I think there's no difference between telecom and any other industry. I think the ones that will perform the best and flourish in the next era of technology are going to be the ones that can use data and software and then the insights generated from analytics to change the speed and the quality of the decisions they can make. I think that's the end result. And I think it's a natural progression on the journey from manual operations to automated operations to intelligent operations.
Let's talk a little bit more about that journey from automated to intelligent. I've heard Rakuten use this analogy of a level 4 self-driving car, but for the network. So what sort of technological tools are you all using to go further down that path? And beyond the technology, what are the implications for your people and for your workflows?
Yeah, that's a good framing of the question and the problem statement, I think, actually. I mean, to start off with, I think the analogy with self-driving cars is a very good one. Because in both cases, what we are trying to do is let a machine see things so it can make decisions autonomously. And just so that everyone's aware that's listening to this, a level 4 automation is one where the car or the network is predominantly driving itself. You still have manual controls in case you ever want to take over, but you don't need to be watching it. And then level 5 autonomy is the ultimate autonomy where you don't even have a steering wheel in a car, you don't have pedals. And it would be the same thing. You'd have a blank, a keyboard with no buttons on it in the network operations center. The journey really starts without AI, because the only way that any machine can see what is happening to it or what it is experiencing is because of the data that it can actually understand. And having access to that data is the number one level of the transformation, I would say. And there's a couple of aspects to data that it's always important to understand. The first aspect is what is the fidelity of that data. So Google Earth is a good analogy for this. If you're out looking at the Earth from the moon, you don't see much detail, but you zoom in, the moment you go down to another level of detail, you can start to actually make a different level of intelligent decision based on that added information. The enemy of good decisions is the average, is what people say. The second aspect of data is timeliness. So obviously having availability of that data as close to the moment and making it available to the engines that are watching it, the AI models that then can interpret it, is another factor on getting to a journey that you want to have full automation, full autonomy. And then what's interesting is that all of that is true if you just want to automate. So automation is both a receiver of data, so it can decide what to do, but also automation generates data at a different granular level, so you can actually analyze it. And that's one of the areas that Rakuten really has taken a leadership role in, because they have digitalized all of the processes involved in running the network. And that's a great asset then. Without that data, you can't see things. And without that horizontal unified data, you will be down to level 1 automation where you are doing binary automations, go faster, go slower, but a bit like cruise control in a car is a good example of a level 1 automation.
So these AI learnings that have been developed within Rakuten Mobile, this process for capturing your data, understanding your data, I guess even checking the quality of it, and then actioning on it. How are we going to see that fed into Symphony? How is that going to be presented to prospective customers?
Yeah, so I think the best way to approach this is that it's really is to view it like an automation framework and automation tooling. I think obviously Rakuten Mobile had a big problem when it started because it had nothing. It was a blank sheet of paper and it had to do everything from scratch. The opposite is true of any existing operator. They have 20 years of very complex instrumentation of a network that's gone through many generations. All of that instrumentation is required at the time. It's there for a reason. It's important to understand if the reason still exists or not. Then another question you asked earlier that pulls into this, there's also then an organization that exists that is designed around that architecture and those domains and those silos. So what we tend to see when we engage with existing operators, it's a very consultative engagement. It's important to start with where the existing operator is today, and to then understand that there is existing levels of automation that exists. This isn't a new thing. It tends to be sub-optimized, and it tends to be held into more individual domains and domain controllers. And I think what we're moving into when you go into a full AI-driven automated is cross-domain. So the surfacing of that data into being available to then be able to write programs against, to design automations is almost like a level one start of the automation. And really, that is automation is when you're writing programs traditional ways to do that. AI then is the next software algorithm that rather than writing a traditional program to do something, you're actually getting a learning model to understand what the data is telling you, and then it can, in its process, automatically generate those automations and then resolve, increasingly in a closed loop way. And the last comment I'll say that is hugely important is don't start with believing this is a massive 5-year transformation, change everything. Start with use cases and grade the use cases based on the most impactful first, and then understand what systems are required to automate those use cases, whether the systems you have support it or whether you need to do something with those systems, and be very specific on doing ROI on the automation cases you choose. And we actually have built that into our automation tooling. So you do submit candidate use cases. They are assessed not from a technical point of view, but from a business point of view. And the ones that are most valuable in terms of increased either quality of service or efficiency are prioritized and executed first.
Yeah, you gave some really practical advice there around, not AI for AI's sake, but AI against a use case that has very demonstrable ROI. And I'm curious to get some perspective, Jeff, when I talk to particularly well-established operators. They have a lot of technical debt. They have a lot of organizational silos, people that are used to working in one particular way. And then I kind of map that to what I think should happen with AI and closed loop automation. It seems like there's a lot of hesitancy to actually take hands off the wheel and to do that hard work of changing the people and the process. I guess to say that another way, technology is maybe the easier piece of this, but just how do you see operators approaching that organizational piece to where they can really get full value from any investments they would make in AI or closed loop automation?
Yeah, let me give you the best way to answer that is to give you I'll generalize a real world example case study. And this is with a large operator who wants to retire their legacy IT technology stacks, primarily around the site building, site management, site commissioning. And what we found is, I think if you look at the annual reports of pretty much every operator, one of the challenges is retiring legacy tooling. All of that legacy tooling has tended to be organically created inside each operator. Quite often they'll call a tool, it's really a spreadsheet, but they call it a tool, or they'll have some simple web app and it's like a daisy chain of many different applications, and somehow it works through cultural knowledge. Very hard to actually change and retire those. And some of the companies we've worked with have tried multiple times and failed, quite often because the incentives of many people aren't aligned to the actual outcome of that retirement. Quite often as well, the resources, there's a lot of outsourcing that's been done to keep going. And it's in the interests of the people that deliver those outsourced man hours to keep the legacy tool chain. So one area, it's really simple. It's around the process of actually designing and deploying sites and redesigning them. The number of people involved in that process and the number of steps is highly complicated. And in a large country, you can have hundreds of thousands of people touching that process every day as they build thousands of sites or refresh thousands of sites in parallel. So one of the big offerings we have is actually the digitalization of site creation, site management, site commissioning. We introduce that in a way that accommodates the existing process as much as possible, but retires what doesn't make sense anymore. And then everybody that is working in that system suddenly is contributing to a common database of understanding. Now, once you have that common database of understanding, then you can start to run AI models on it. So you can start to ask which actual outsourced vendors, which turf vendors are performing the best? Where is the time taken that's slowing people down in different markets? What are the comparisons? What should we be introducing as process improvements where? So you can start to do almost automated vendor selection, automated suggestions on process improvement, because everything is time-stamped and all interactions are recorded. You can imagine then you can make there's some serious insights you can generate from that are very hard to understand if the data is distributed and disparate across an organization.
It's a really interesting thing that you referenced, this notion that institutional knowledge and memory that resides in people's heads within external vendors, it's foundational to making the whole thing work, but it's analog, so you can't just stick it into a model and go on. That's pretty tricky kind of situation.
It's the number one problem. And if an interesting question always to ask, if somebody reaches out and asks you, I want AI to solve my problems, it's always interesting to take a step back and ask the first question, well, how do you make decisions today? And what data do you use to make those decisions? And how do you get access to that data? And 9 times out of 10, in a lot of situations, especially in very institutional organizations, they're not using very much data. They don't have very much data. And therefore, if you haven't got the data, you can't expect a machine to make better decisions than a human can. So data is 90% of the work in AI.
One thing that has come up in all of the conversations here at the Telco AI Deep Dive has been this idea that it's pressing. It's really important to already have a strategy, to already be executing on it. So curious, one, do you agree with the sense of urgency that's been communicated largely by vendors of various AI solutions? And do you think that operators, we'll make a generalization there, but operators have recognized that they need to do something?
I don't think there is a sense of urgency with AI. I think there's a sense of urgency on how to enable everybody in our industry in telecom to make better decisions faster. And you are on a journey then to make sure you have access to the knowledge you need. You can then make better decisions. And then AI, once you have that, then AI allows you to answer questions in a much more open, creative interface way. And the answers that you might find can be very, very different because it's looking at the data in a different way than the traditional processors are. But I'm a bit nervous with our industry that we tend to jump on magical answers as if they're going to deliver the result we want. And unfortunately, I believe that AI can completely transform our industry, but it's working at the basics that then end up with you being able to be a data-driven organization with AI.
So if you look out maybe 3 years, and I acknowledge that I'm asking you to speculate a little bit, but what do you think the difference is going to be between an operator who has made the right decisions around best utilization of their data and maybe is in that level 4, level 5 position versus an operator that, hasn't urgently pursued this, maybe hasn't started with that foundational look at just, data hygiene? What's the difference going to be?
It's going to be as profound as the difference between the business economics of an Amazon Web Services versus a traditional enterprise IT server vendor. You won't be able to compete at the velocity required, at the agility required, and then at the business return. So by having that insight into the operations, the optimizations you can suddenly make are absolutely tremendous. And you can start to, one of the magics in this, I think that there's a lot of learnings we can take from the hyperscaler industry. You can start to simplify what you do. You can start to remove cost, streamline operations, lower your hours to keep the network running versus focusing on the customer. Today, I think one of the problems we have is that 70% plus of our energy in the industry is purely on just keeping the network running. And we don't have enough time or budget to actually decide what we want to provide of value to the customers above that. That should be reversed with this journey.
So, Jeff, it's obviously an important conversation that's going to be happening in a lot of boardrooms within operator organizations going forward. So any summary thoughts you'd leave our audience with as they kind of face down these difficult long-term decisions that they're going to have to make?
Yeah, I think advice number one is go underneath the jargon and the hype and the terminology. Embrace a very business-driven, ROI-driven, use case, user group, work stream approach to starting to investigate yourself how to understand what these new technologies from automation, data, and AI can do for you, and be very, very disciplined and prescriptive in that. So if you run a really good process on that, then I think you can then start to accelerate that journey. And the journey, I think you'll do a 1 to 2 to 3 year journey. And once you get into your stride, then it will feel like you're flying through the skies. At some point, it will click into a institutional, data-driven, AI-driven way of working. For example, I'll give you one example. We've got lots of practical things that are simple when we say them, but maybe aren't obvious. So whenever there's an outage, as part of the root cause analysis, if we haven't managed to automate it, we do ask the question, can this be automated? If it can be automated, we immediately put it in as a candidate for automation that then it can get selected. When we have a problem in the network, in the actual management console, we actually recommend potential automations to solve that, but we don't automatically trigger them. But there is a checkbox there that says, do you want to automatically trigger this? It has been recognized it's happened this number of times before with this result. So our confidence is high that we can identify that when these things happen, this is the response, and we can go closed loop. But at all times, the operations people can decide how slow or fast they want to move on that, and everything is recorded so that there can always be a post-analysis by humans or machines again that says, okay, let's do a vendor selection. Which vendor equipment is working the best? It becomes very fascinating once you can ask questions to data, but you have to have the data.
Excellent, Jeff. This was really good practical advice. I appreciate you taking the time to lend your perspective to me and to our audience.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it, Sean.